Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on NetSuite year-end close, presented by myself, Tom Elliott. So just start through with the agenda, what we're going to cover today. So there's three main areas that we're going to talk about. Firstly, we'll talk about preparing for year-end close. Then we'll talk about the two different options there are in NetSuite. So there's the automatic close and manual close. And each of these I'll talk through the options in NetSuite, go through, and I'll demonstrate these in NetSuite. So preparing for year-end close. So some of the points of consideration for the year-end closing are: you need to close all the periods included in the year. And as you know, if you currently close each period in your NetSuite account, you know that there's a checklist of the required tasks that need to be provided. And actually, when we go through the automatic close shortly in NetSuite, we'll close off one of our periods, and we'll see the tasks there. We won't go through all the steps, but we'll see the task list that's provided. So it's just a case of closing off all of these. If you're using multiple currencies, you need to revalue the opening current balances for each period before you can close it. And then just another thing to note here, the difference between closing a period and locking transactions for a period. So closing a period will prevent postings for any dates included in that period by anyone. And this should be the final step after a process of accounts review, and reconciliation. In comparison, locking transactions for a period prevents users without override permission from posting to the period and is a preliminary task before closing the account. So, first of our two choices or two options for closing an account. So this is automatic closing. So as it says here, you can see this is the preferred method of closing a year in NetSuite. So the general ledger ties the financials for the same periods run for all accounts with the exception of the retained earning accounts. What happens is NetSuite posts a placeholder entry to the retained earning account in the balance sheet to reflect the period to reflect the income for the period that has been run. But what happens is NetSuite does not post the balance to retained earnings because doing so would zero the past income statements and prevent them from being reviewed. So I'll show you what that means shortly inside NetSuite. If we're going to do an automatic close, the steps involved in this are to close all the periods for the year, and then it's just a case of running the P&L, balance sheet, and trial balance reports to view your data in NetSuite. It's not actually anything that needs to be done at this stage, it's just reviewing your data once it's happened. So now I'm going to jump through into NetSuite, and we're going to go through actually the steps that what we do if we're going to go through an automatic close. So first thing we do is we're going to view our accounting periods. So if I go through my manage accounting periods. So obviously this is one of our test accounts. So I'm going to go back to financial year 2012 because this is when the last set of periods have been closed. So we can see that all my periods are closed up until November 2012. That's indicated here by this green tick here saying it's closed. So December 2012 we're going to have a look at in a minute. This isn't closed, but you can see these transactions have been locked for accounts payable, accounts receivable, and all GL transactions. So in a minute I'm just going to open this up. So here's the checklist that I was talking about before, with the steps to go through of your closing your periods. So if I click on this option here, it will load up my checklist. So we can see here it says the period name, so we're looking at December 2012. Our start and end date of the period. I've got a status of open because we haven't completed all the statuses here. So we can see this checklist is what we need to go through to close our period. So it starts with the lock accounts receivable, accounts payable, and lock all. So there, if I just jump back a page, you can see that's what's happened here, and we can see that's already been done. So because those have been complete, we can see the locks here. That means nothing can be posted to accounts payable, accounts receivable, or any RGL transactions, obviously unless we have those right permissions. The next step would be to resolve any date period mismatches. I'm not going to go through each of the different statuses here, but I'll go through some of them. So for example, I can see there's 3 that haven't been completed. The final one is actually the close stage. But before that, I still need to complete my calculate my consolidated exchange rates and then eliminate any intercompany transactions. Oh, sorry, before that, actually, I need to do my. You can see the status here. The green tick would indicate if it was being complete. So to complete a task, I can just click on the icon here. So I've got an option here for my revalue opening foreign currency balances. So I can just click on currency evaluation, and NetSuite will go through and do this for me. I can click which accounts I want to do it for. I can include or exclude accounts if I want to. I can save that. So now that's gone on done behind the scenes, and I can mark this task as complete now for me in NetSuite. So then the next stage is the calculate consolidated exchange rates. So if I click on this icon, then it will take me through to my next task. And I can do this simply by just clicking this option here again. Again, NetSuite makes it very easy for us. Click on the calculate consolidated exchange rates. I can calculate any of the exchange rates if I want to. So for example here, I can do it from Denmark to my EMEA subsidiary. Or I can just go back and I can click on calculate here, and NetSuite will calculate my consolidated exchange rates for me. Once this has been done, I can go back to my period close options. And again, I can mark this task as complete. Okay. Now I can see that the only stage left over in my period task checklist is my elimination of intercompany transactions. Again, this green arrow here will take me through to the task. And then again, I can select the option here for me to run the intercompany eliminations. And then I can select specific classes if I wanted to, departments, locations, or I can just save it to do for everything. Okay, and then I can run my intercompany eliminations, and then I could go back to period close. Sorry, I did it again then, but now I can mark the task as complete. And there we go again. So now I've actually completed all my tasks in this period close checklist. Obviously, some of those were already done. But I finished off the final ones, and now we can see obviously the status of all of these turned to a green tick, except for the final one, which is the close one here. So to close my period, I can click on the icon here. And they'll load up my final task here, and I can say, now I can just close the period. And there we are, we've got our periods now closed. So now if I went to view my manage accounting periods, and went back to 2012, I can see December 2012 is now period close. So one thing worth noting is you can reopen a period. If I go back into my period 2012 December checklist, I can click on this icon here, and I can have actually option to reopen the period. This obviously I'm not as an administrator, so not everyone has the right to do this, and it forces me to enter justification as to why I'm reopening the accounting period. So if I'm doing the automatic close, once I've closed all my periods, in theory that's everything that actually needs to be done within the system. Then it would just be a case of going through my reports and checking off that everything is as I expect. So if I cancel out that now, the first option I'm going to go to is the P&L report. So this is my income statement report. I've got it saved in my shortcuts here. So if I go to my income statement, now I'm going to look at the data to 2013. The reason I'm selecting 2013 is that actually in this account, this is the first year that I've got any data in the system. So I can see I haven't got a lot of data in here, but I can see I've got a total net profit and loss value for my year 2013 of just over £1 million. Now I'm just making note of this because in a little while we're going to see how this gets pulled through into the balance sheet. So this is my income statement report for the year, and now what I want to do is jump to again I've got shortcut to the balance sheet report, and here I've got my balance sheet report for the year. So one thing to note here then is I've got my net income value here of just over £1 million. So this is my net income value here, and that is exactly equal to my total profit and loss for the year that was shown in the profit and loss account. So what I can do is if I click on this value here for net income, view the detailed report, it's actually going to take me directly into this income statement, back into my income statement report. This is because this account is actually not an account any data is posted into. So if I just jump back to my balance sheet, it's not posted into this account. I can't click on this account to see any of the detail behind it. It is just a calculated value, if you like, that's pulled through from the income statement. So for example, what I mean by that, if, for example, fixed assets, my account 3000 AD building, I can actually click on that account and it will take me into the general ledger account of 3100. I don't have an account there for my balance sheet for net income. It is just a value pulled through NetSuite. One thing to note here is that there is no retained earnings account showing up on my balance sheet report here. And this is due to the fact, as I said before, 2013 is the first year that's got any data in this NetSuite account. But actually, in a little while, we're going to jump back into this balance sheet report 2014, and then we'll be able to see how the retained earnings works within NetSuite. So for now, that's my balance sheet report, and the final report I can show is my trial balance report. Okay, and then this is at December 2013, and I can see these are my values that have been picked up in NetSuite for the year, and then I can see the same value again for my total trial balance report. Okay, so that is the automatic close method. And as I said before, this is the preferred method of closing the year within NetSuite. All that's required of you is to go through and close all the periods for the year, and then it's just a case of actually running the P&L balance sheet and trials balance reports just to make sure that all your data is pulled through as expected. The other option is to actually do a manual close in NetSuite. So if I just show you this, as I said here, this is not a preferred method of the year close, and is actually not recommended by NetSuite itself. What happens in a manual close is that NetSuite will zero any past income statements and prevent these from being viewed. And I'll show you what I mean by that shortly in NetSuite. So if you are to run a manual close in NetSuite, you'd run your P&L, you then raise a journal that zeroes out the income and expense accounts and transfers the balance to a retained earnings account, and then you'd actually go through and close the periods here. Because obviously if you close the periods before running your journal, before trying to run your journal, you wouldn't do it, because obviously once you close the period, you can't post any transactions to it. So I'm just going to say again, this is not the preferred method of year-end close in NetSuite. So I'm going to show you what I mean by the fact of why it's not preferred and what would happen if you zero out the past income statements. So I'm going to go back into NetSuite, and I am going to go back into my P&L report I looked at before, or my income statement report as it's called here in NetSuite. But what I'm going to do now is change my year to 2014. So I'll just change my end date and my start date. So now if I refresh it, so now NetSuite is showing you my income statement for 2014. You can see there's a lot more data in there, and you can now see I've got a total value here of 17 million for my net profit and loss. Again, we'll see that shortly when it's pulled through to the balance sheet. But what I want to show is what I mean by why we don't want to post a journal to close off this. So what happens here is if I click on my account here, 4001 revenue. So obviously, as I was saying before, this is showing me everything from January 2014 to December 2014. So I can see here I've got a list of invoices, and I've got every invoice going from the 5th of January 2014, and I can scroll all the way down, and I see all my invoices up until the end of the year. And what you've got here is a running balance down the right-hand side. Now what you can see is actually we don't start on 0, we start on just over 1 million. And this is coming through from our revenue account from 2013. And this is our running balance. So because we didn't close out, because we didn't run manual process and close out last year's balance, we can see this value still running here. So what it means is, if you run a manual close to raise a journal, you will zero out the income and expenses account. So what happens back in NetSuite, we won't see this balance figure here. It won't exist because it would have been posted through into the retained earnings account, and this running balance won't pick up any values previous to 2014. So obviously if you're using NetSuite over multiple years, by doing the automatic close, you'll keep your running balance going forward. And if I were to change to 2013, so if I did my start date of 2013 and refresh it, so obviously this is just still looking at one account, but now I can see all my transactions for 2013 as well, because I haven't run a journal to post them through to the retained earnings account. Okay, so that's one reason not to do the manual close. So now I'm going to go back to my balance sheet account. And again, I'm going to change it to look at 2014. And what we'll see this time is, as well as seeing a net income account, we will see the retained earnings account. So we can see that net income account, again, is this 17,272. So that's our total profit for the year that we saw on the income statement for 2014. But we can see this retained earnings account, 1019, and that is our income statement for 2013. That was our total profit for the year. So what I can do, if I click on this, to view a detailed report, NetSuite will not produce a detailed report for the retained earnings account. This is because this account is actually not showing, or it's not really pulling through in the account any data. There's no data being stored in this account, I should say. It's just picking up the value that was there from up to December 2013. It is, a calculated account, and no data by default will be posted into this account. So if I go back into my my balance sheet for the year 2014, although it shows a value, as I said, there's no actual transactions posted into this retained earnings account. And like the net income account, you can't click on it, whereas you can for any of the other accounts. So one thing worth noting is the retained earnings account is a system account and cannot be deleted or substituted with another account. So if I go into, let's have a look, let's go to setup under accounting, and let's go to my chart of accounts. I'm going to have a look at my retained earnings account, so I'm just going to do this by number, and it should be just down here. Let's have a look. There we go, retained earnings account. So if I click on, that's going to take me back to the register, which we already know is going to have no data in it. If I go back into my list of accounts, and this time go to edit it, and to find it again, you will see I have no option to delete this account. So my retained earnings account cannot be deleted. And actually, if I go back to this account, the list of all my accounts, you'll see on this view I've actually selected whether or not these accounts can be deleted. And you can see that my retained earnings account here cannot be deleted. So it cannot be deleted. If you do want to adjust the retained earnings or allocate the balance to any other equity accounts, you can post a journal and it will be reflected on the balance sheet. Any adjustments to your retained earnings account are combined on the balance sheet along with any other account figures. So for example, if your net income for 2013 was £100,000 and you made a journal entry that debited the retained earnings accounts by £10,000, your balance sheet would display £90,000 credit, assuming obviously it was first year of business. Okay? So you can post journals to it if you want to, but it will not be combined by anything that's pulled through from the P&L. Okay, so if I just go back to my balance sheet, so that is what happens here. So if I just go back to my PowerPoint presentation, I'll just go back here. So just to summarize really, in NetSuite there's two options to close out your year end. There's the automatic close, which is the preferred method of closing the year, and doesn't require any real work from your side. All you need to do is close out each of your periods by the checklist we saw before, and then actually the retained earnings account will be calculated within NetSuite for you. And the advantage of this is we can go back each year and still see all our profit and loss transactions, and we can see the balance carried forward. The other option is a manual close, which is not the preferred method and is not recommended by NetSuite, because this will close out will zero out all past income statements and prevent these values from being viewed. But if you were to do this, you'd run the P&L, and then you'd raise a journal that zeroes the income and expenses accounts and transfers this to the retained earnings account, and then you finalise this with the closing the periods for the year. So thank you very much for listening to this NetSuite year-end close. If you've got any questions, please type them in the chat now, or if not, if you think of them later on, please email them to sales@nolanbusinesssolutions.com, and someone will be able to get back to you for you. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.